Well, it was a fun night last night. The sky was gorgeous. You could see the even faint stars. First all-nighter I've spent with my telescope. I'm going to start out by saying that when I was a child growing up, I grew up in a predominantly Christian culture. And the culture that I grew up in was predominantly also small town mid-America. And there were places around that didn't have alcohol. They didn't have like topless bars. They didn't sell pornography. They didn't, different places. Things were off limits. There were Sabbath blue or Sunday blue laws where only necessary services were open on Sunday. And I used to hear people grumble about that. And what they would say is, people are trying to legislate morality. You can't legislate morality. As I've grown up, I've thought about that, and I think it deserves a little bit of contemplation. I'm going to ask a series of questions, and what we've got to do is kind of deal with them one at a time, and the first question opens the door to the second question, which might open the door to the third idea. So it goes something like this. Except for a few laws, like being in the right turn lane when you turn right and the left turn lane when you turn left, or some few things like that, it seems to me that the majority, I would almost say all, but you should never say, you should never say always. But I would say the majority of rules and regulations that we live by, the big ones that we punish people for, are based on a kind of a belief that there are some things that are beneficial and some things that are not beneficial, some things that are better, some things that are worse, some things that are good, some things that are bad. Now, for instance, robbing a store, or stealing, we generally think of that as bad. Killing somebody, we generally think of that as bad. Most of the crimes that we have, we generally think of as bad. And if we just ask someone, do you think it's bad to steal? Do you think it's bad to beat somebody up? Do you think it's bad to murder? Do you think, these crimes, do you think it's bad to cheat on your taxes? I think the majority of people would say, yeah, those things are bad. And let me go a little farther than that. The majority of our views of what's good or what's bad come out of some worldview that we hold. Well, that is that not everybody in the world has the same views of what's good and what's bad. If we go to perhaps an organized crime family, they may have a different perspective on what is good and what's bad. Ratting out on somebody might be bad. Stealing may not be considered bad, but might be even considered honorable and get you ahead in an organized crime family. So, and the same is true with other cultures. So, and we might say, oh yeah, but that's a deviant, subculture. Well, that's because we come from a culture that thinks that's deviant. So let's say the majority of rules come from a view of right and wrong, and most of the views of right and wrong come from an overall worldview. Okay, I hope I'm not losing us yet, because I want to add another step to it. The majority of our rules come from a belief that some things are right or good, and some things are wrong or bad. The majority of our views of what is wrong and what's bad come from a worldview that we may hold, while someone else may hold a different worldview. Now, one more step I want to add to this, and that step is simply this. Not only do we act as if we can, mandate right and wrong, mandate morality, legislate morality, almost all of our legislation is designed to legislate morality. I sometimes wish I could go back as a little child again when I would hear people say, you can't legislate morality, and I wish I could respond, why, of course we do. We can. We can and we do all the time. It is not a question as to whether we try to legislate morality. The question is, whose morality do we legislate? Who is the dominant worldview in the culture? Because that's the culture that will decide what is right and wrong, which is the culture that will set the rules and the punishments and the rewards for those that follow the rules that they decide on from their worldview. Well, we're halfway through another week. And I'm looking forward to Sunday when we get to meet together and worship together again. In the meantime, I think I've left us quite a bit to chew on. A little nugget for contemplation. That is, what is the dominant worldview of this culture, and what are the minority worldviews of this culture? And are the worldviews changing? You see, the laws and the views of right and wrong don't change exactly when the worldview changes. They kind of tag along later as a trickle down. The worldview gains popularity and then gains power and gains strength. Then it becomes a dominant worldview, and then it writes the sets of rules, and then it writes the sets of rewards and punishments, and that all takes, a generation or two or three or four to do. So it gives us something to chew on now as we look at our culture. But in the meantime, may God bless you and watch over you and give you wisdom to follow a godly path and not be sidetracked by worldviews that are not of God.